On a dark, rainy night, Ben, a single father, finds a woman chained to a tree, abandoned and broken. Her wedding dress torn, her body trembling with fear, and her eyes silently pleading for help. With nothing but a broken heart and his daughter to guide him, Ben takes her in. Little does he know, rescuing her will not only change her life, it will change his too. But Zoe has a painful past, and as she begins to open up, the truth behind her abandonment could shatter everything they've built together. What happens next will leave you breathless. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let us know where you're watching from, and now let's jump into the story. The rain hammered against the windshield, each drop sounding like a loud knock from the outside world. The kind of rain that didn't just fall, it felt like the sky was mourning with you. Ben, a man in his late 30s, gripped the wheel of his rundown pickup, the headlights barely cutting through the heavy curtain of water ahead. Every stretch of the road seemed endless, every mile a reminder of the uphill battle he faced. Another job interview. Another, "We'll call you." Nothing had changed. Not since his wife Hannah passed away 2 years ago. His clothes were still damp from sitting in the uncomfortable waiting room chair, the smell of stale coffee clinging to him. His wallet, once filled with hopeful plans for the future, was now empty, save for a single picture of his daughter. Emma, his 6-year-old daughter, slept soundly in the back seat, her tiny hands clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. Ben glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and sorrow. She was the only thing left in his life that gave him purpose. Everything else, the house, the savings, even his confidence, had slipped away after losing her mother. But Emma, she was different. She was the only thing he still had, the only reason he kept going. Every day felt like a race against despair, and even though Ben fought with all his might, it felt like he was losing. The truck's heater coughed weakly, barely warming the truck's cabin. He exhaled slowly, watching the fog bloom on the glass. The world had grown colder, and his sense of hope had become harder to find. As Ben turned down the familiar winding road toward their cramped one-bedroom rental, a wave of exhaustion hit him. The constant weight of his troubles, the unpaid bills, the empty fridge, the failure of his efforts felt heavier than ever. But he couldn't let Emma see it. She couldn't know how close he was to giving up. Not for her. Not yet. The windshield wipers squeaked rhythmically, a sad mechanical beat that matched the rhythm of his life. With each passing day, it seemed like the universe was telling him to give up, to accept that this was as good as it would get. But in the silence of the truck, with Emma's soft breathing in the back seat, Ben knew he couldn't give up. Not for her. She needed him. The road ahead seemed endless, each turn a reflection of his life, twisting, uncertain, but somehow still moving forward. He drove through the rain, his eyes focused ahead, lost in the monotony of the journey. That was until something caught his eye. As he rounded a bend, the headlights of his truck cut through the heavy rain and shadows, briefly illuminating something white at the side of the road. At first he thought it was just a trick of the light, maybe a reflection from the trees or a patch of mist. But as his truck came closer, he noticed it again. Something white, flickering in the corner of his vision. A flash of color against the darkened backdrop of rain-soaked trees. Instinctively, he slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding slightly before it came to a stop on the muddy shoulder. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from an unsettling feeling deep in his chest. Something was wrong. Ben didn't know why, but he felt compelled to pull over. He glanced at Emma in the rearview mirror. She was still asleep, unaware of the strange sensation that had overtaken him. Leaving her there, safe and sound, he stepped out of the truck, the rain immediately soaking him to the bone. The earth beneath his boots was soaked, the ground soft and squelching with each step he took. The rain blurred his vision, but as he neared the edge of the trees, he could see a figure standing there. At first, he thought it was a scarecrow or maybe a mannequin, a strange thing to see out here, but it didn't seem entirely impossible. But as he drew closer, the truth hit him like a cold wave. A woman stood there, soaked to the bone, chained to a tree. Her once elegant bridal gown was torn and filthy, the fabric clinging to her frail body. Her feet were bare, her arms trembling with the cold. Her face was streaked with mud and tears, but her eyes, those eyes, were wide and haunted, staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, but there was a desperation in her gaze, an undeniable plea for help. Ben froze. His heart skipped a beat as disbelief twisted inside him. His thoughts raced, but he couldn't move. He couldn't process what he was seeing. A woman, chained, alone, abandoned. "Are you okay?" Ben's voice was barely audible over the sound of the rain. His words felt small, useless against the weight of the moment. The woman didn't respond. She didn't speak. She just stood there, trembling, her eyes locked onto his with a kind of silent plea that spoke volumes. He looked around. No car, no house, no sign of anyone else. Just her. Alone. Ben's own troubles. His empty wallet, his broken dreams, suddenly felt so small in comparison to what this woman must have been through. She needed help. Whoever she was, whatever had happened to her, she needed help. And, in that moment, Ben knew he couldn't just walk away. No matter how tired, no matter how broken, he couldn't leave her there. He quickly took off his coat, draping it over her trembling shoulders. "You're safe now," he whispered. Not yet realizing how much this moment would change both their lives, not yet realizing that in rescuing her he might just be rescuing himself too. But for now, all he could do was help her, bring her back to the truck, and figure out what had happened. Whatever had led her here, whatever brokenness had brought her to this point, it didn't matter right now. What mattered was that he wasn't alone anymore, and neither was she. As he helped the woman back to the truck, the rain continued to pour, as if the world was weeping with them both. Ben's hands shook as he helped the woman into the truck, her frail body trembling against him. He had never expected his night to turn out like this. The world outside seemed to vanish, replaced by the sound of the rain, the soft creak of the truck's suspension, and the uneasy feeling that something big had just changed. The woman, now wrapped in his coat, was silent, exhausted, and barely aware of her surroundings. Ben didn't ask her name just yet. He could see the pain in her eyes, a pain so deep it would take more than a few questions to unlock. He slid into the driver's seat and started the truck, his fingers still cold, against the wheel. His heart pounded, his mind racing. What had happened to her? Why was she chained to a tree in the middle of nowhere, left to face the storm alone? He had seen pain in his own life, losing Hannah, the steady unraveling of his world. But nothing could compare to what this woman had been through. Nothing could prepare him for the way she'd looked at him with those wide, desperate eyes. The rain hit the windshield harder now, as if the sky itself had decided to join in the mystery of the night. Ben glanced in the rearview mirror at Emma, still asleep in the back seat. He couldn't bear to wake her, not yet. She didn't need to see this, not yet. But he also knew that she'd have questions when she woke up. The woman beside him was a stranger, a woman with no explanation, no name, no story yet. And Ben knew that he couldn't let her go. Not like this. Not when she needed him. He drove slowly, navigating the slick road, his thoughts a jumble of worry and disbelief. Who would do this to a person? What kind of cruelty could chain someone to a tree in the middle of nowhere? The image of her standing there, torn gown, trembling body, eyes filled with silent pain, kept replaying in his mind. As he turned into the narrow driveway of his one-bedroom rental, Ben couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just been forever altered. He parked the truck and quickly moved around to the other side, gently waking the woman. "Hey, we're home," he said softly, trying not to startle her. She blinked slowly, her eyes still filled with exhaustion and confusion. Ben helped her out of the truck, his arm supporting her as they made their way to the front door. The house was small, cramped really, peeling paint on the walls, a fridge that hummed too loud, and a space heater that worked when it felt like it The kind of place where people lived but didn't thrive. Ben had no business bringing anyone else into this small, broken home. Yet, as he looked down at the woman, he couldn't find it in himself to turn her away. There was something in her eyes, a rawness, a brokenness that cut through him. He couldn't walk away from that. He guided her to the couch, draping a blanket over her once she was settled. The woman still didn't speak, her eyes glazed over with exhaustion. Ben hesitated for a moment before turning to Emma, who had begun to stir in the back seat. "Emma, honey," he called softly. "Come on inside." Emma rubbed her eyes, blinking at the new person on the couch. "Daddy, who's that?" she asked, her voice still thick with sleep. Ben glanced down at her, unsure of how to explain. How could he tell her that this woman, this stranger, had been left chained to a tree in the middle of nowhere? How could he explain the weight of that kind of hurt, that kind of abandonment, to a 6-year-old? "Her name is Zoe," Ben said quietly, his voice carrying a warmth that he hadn't realized was there. "She's going to stay with us for a little while. She needs our help." Zoe, still silent, shifted slightly on the couch, her hands gripping the blanket. She looked over at Emma, her face softening for the first time since Ben had found her. Emma didn't seem scared, which relieved Ben. Instead, she climbed up next to Zoe and handed her the stuffed rabbit she was clutching. "You can keep him," Emma said with a smile. "He's my favorite." Zoe looked at the rabbit for a moment and then, with a slight tremble in her voice, whispered, "Thank you." Ben stood in the doorway, watching them both. Emma had a way of making people feel safe even when they didn't deserve it. Zoe seemed to relax a little, holding the stuffed rabbit tightly in her hands as if it were the first thing she'd been given in a long time. Ben felt a flicker of hope in his chest. He didn't know how or why, but something told him that this moment, this unexpected encounter was going to change everything. As the night went on, Ben didn't sleep. He couldn't. Too many questions swirled in his mind, unanswered. What had happened to Zoe? Why had she been left there, abandoned in the rain with no one to protect her? But he knew that he couldn't push her for answers yet. She wasn't ready, and neither was he. He spent the night watching over her, checking on Emma every so often as she slept soundly in her room. The house, once filled with silence and sadness, now seemed filled with the promise of something new. Something uncertain, but maybe even hopeful. As the rain continued to fall outside, Ben realized that he had taken the first step toward something different, toward a life that, despite everything, could still have meaning. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of a new chapter for them all. Zoe's quiet presence in the house was like a puzzle piece, one that didn't quite fit but still seemed to belong. The journey that had led him here was unclear, but Ben was determined to find out where it would take him next. He couldn't abandon her now. He wouldn't. The days that followed Zoe's arrival were quiet, yet something in the house began to shift. Ben noticed it first. The silence that had once dominated the small, cramped home was now punctuated by faint sounds. Soft laughter from Emma, the quiet hum of the old fridge, and even the gentle rustling of Zoe moving around the house. She didn't speak much, still recovering from the trauma she had endured, but there was a quiet energy about her. The way she moved, how she helped around the house without being asked. It was as though she was slowly finding her place in a world that had abandoned her. Zoe didn't need to be told what to do. She folded the laundry when she saw it piled up on the couch. She mended a small tear in Emma's favorite stuffed rabbit, using needle and thread with careful hands. Even when Ben didn't ask, she'd fix things around the apartment, tightening a loose cabinet door, wiping down dusty surfaces. She moved with an air of determination, as if these small, quiet acts were her way of healing. Ben didn't understand it, but he noticed. Zoe wasn't just surviving. She was slowly rebuilding something within herself. He couldn't help but wonder how much of this was for him or maybe for Emma. But whatever it was, it seemed to lift the heaviness in the house. Their home, which had been filled with sadness and silence after Hannah's death, now felt lighter, like there was hope creeping in through the cracks. Emma, too, was different. At first, She had been shy around Zoe, unsure of how to approach this stranger who had appeared in their home. But it didn't take long for Zoe to win her over. One morning, Ben found them sitting on the floor, crayons scattered around them as they colored together. Zoe was smiling, really smiling, and Emma's laughter, the kind of carefree, joyous sound Ben hadn't heard in months, filled the room. It was a sound he hadn't realized he had been missing. He watched them from the doorway, his heart swelling. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected Zoe to bring such a sense of calm into their chaotic lives. Emma had always been his light, but now Zoe was becoming a quiet part of their healing too. One evening, after dinner, Zoe stood by the window gazing out at the dark trees swaying in the wind. Ben, still unsure of what to say, sat at the small kitchen table, nursing a cup of lukewarm tea. It had become a routine. He'd drink his tea, she'd stand by the window, and neither of them would speak much. There was no pressure, just a shared understanding that words weren't always necessary. The air between them was still fragile, but there was an unspoken trust growing. "I was supposed to be married that day." Zoe's voice broke the silence, soft but heavy with emotion. Ben looked up, his heart tightening at the quiet pain in her words. She hadn't shared much about her past, only bits and pieces when she felt ready. This was the first time she'd spoken so openly, and Ben listened closely, giving her the space to continue. "I didn't love him," Zoe whispered, her voice cracking like a dry branch. "I didn't even know him. My family, they said love was a luxury. They said it was about duty, about honor." She paused, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the edge of the windowsill. "They told me I had to marry him, that it was what was expected. But I couldn't marry a man I didn't know. So I ran." Ben didn't speak. He couldn't. The pain in Zoe's voice was raw, and he could feel it deep in his chest. He wanted to say something, anything, to ease her pain, but there were no words that could fix what she had been through. Instead, he simply nodded, his eyes full of understanding. Zoe's voice dropped to a whisper. "They found me," she said, her eyes fixed on the floor. "They said I had brought shame, so they chained me. They left me there to think about what I'd done." The silence that followed was thick with grief. Ben's heart ached for her. How could anyone do something like that? How could anyone treat another human being with such cruelty? He wanted to rage, to shout, to demand answers, but he knew that wasn't what Zoe needed right now. She needed understanding. She needed to feel like she mattered. Zoe's eyes glistened with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "I thought no one would ever stop," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I thought maybe I didn't matter enough to be saved." Ben stood slowly, his legs stiff from sitting for too long. He walked over to her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You were never too lost," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You were just waiting to be found by someone who could see your worth." The words hung in the air, simple, but true. Zoe didn't respond at first. She just stood there, trembling slightly before turning to face Ben. For the first time since he'd met her, she allowed herself to cry. Her tears fell slowly at first, then faster until her sobs filled the room. Ben didn't know what to do, but he stood there with her, holding her, as she let the pain flow out of her. He had expected to be the one to save her, but in this moment, he realized it wasn't just about saving Zoe. It was about finding something within himself, something he had lost along the way. It was about being there for each other, broken as they were, and choosing to move forward together. That night, as they sat together in the quiet of the house, Ben realized that everything was changing. Slowly, but surely, something fragile and beautiful was taking root in their home. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But for the first time in a long while, Ben felt hope. Hope for the future, hope for healing, and most importantly, hope for the family they were becoming. The days passed, and as the seasons changed, so did the atmosphere in the small apartment. Ben could feel it in his bones. Something was shifting. It was subtle at first, like the first hint of sunlight creeping through a darkened room, but it was there. Emma's laughter became more frequent, her bright eyes now full of excitement rather than sadness. Zoe, though still quiet and reserved, had started to come out of her shell. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning to live again. And so, it seemed, was Ben. One evening, after they'd finished dinner, Ben found himself alone in the kitchen cleaning up. The usual silence filled the room, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence that had marked the house for so long. It was more peaceful now, as if the house itself had started to breathe again. Zoe was sitting by the window, her gaze fixed on the outside world as the last light of day began to fade into night. Ben had noticed how Zoe often sat by the window in the evenings, lost in thought. He knew she wasn't trying to escape. She was just trying to piece together her thoughts, her memories. They had shared many quiet moments together, but this night felt different. Zoe hadn't said much that day. She seemed distant, like she was holding something back. He could sense she was ready to talk, ready to share what she had been carrying inside. "Zoe," Ben said softly, walking over to the table where she sat. He wasn't sure how to start, but he knew he had to. "You don't have to talk about it if you're not ready, but if you want to, I'm here. I want to listen." Zoe didn't turn to look at him at first. She just stared out the window, her fingers tracing the edge of the sill. After a long moment, she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was supposed to be married," she began, her words slow and hesitant, like she was testing the weight of them. The dress, the ceremony. It was all planned. I was supposed to be happy. Ben sat down next to her, his heart heavy with the pain in her voice. He didn't interrupt, letting her continue when she was ready. "But I didn't love him," Zoe continued, her eyes still locked on the fading sky outside. "I didn't even know him. My family. They told me love wasn't something I could have. They said it was a luxury. They said I had to do my duty." There was a bitterness in her voice now, a sharp edge that Ben could feel deep in his chest. He had heard of such things before. Traditions, cultures, families that valued reputation over happiness. But hearing it from Zoe made it all the more real. This wasn't just a story. This was her life. "My family didn't care about my feelings," she said quietly, her eyes now moist with unshed tears. "They didn't care if I loved him, it didn't matter. They said it was my duty, my responsibility to uphold the family honor." Ben felt a lump in his throat. He had seen the strength in Zoe before, but now as she spoke about the life that had been forced upon her, he saw the pain she had hidden so well. He wanted to say something, to comfort her, but he knew that this wasn't a moment for words. This was a moment for her to express the truth. "I ran," Zoe whispered. "I couldn't marry him. I couldn't live a life without love, so I ran. And they found me." She paused, her face tightening with pain. "They said I had brought shame, so they chained me to a tree. They left me there, alone, in the rain, to think about what I'd done." Ben felt his chest tighten as he processed her words, the cruelty she had faced, the heartlessness of those who were supposed to love and protect her cut through him. He couldn't fathom how anyone could treat another person like that. How could a family, a society, do this to someone? Zoe's voice cracked as she continued. "I thought no one would ever come. I thought I didn't matter enough to be saved." Ben stood up, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. This time he didn't try to offer any words of comfort. He just let her feel what she needed to feel. But when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "You matter. You've always mattered," he said softly. "You just needed someone to see your worth." Zoe looked up at him, her eyes searching his face as if looking for the truth in his words. She didn't say anything, but for the first time, she allowed herself to cry. The tears that had been waiting to fall now flowed, freely. And Ben stood there, letting her cry without saying a word. He didn't need to fix it. He didn't need to make it better. He just needed to be there, to help her carry the weight of what she had been through. In the silence that followed, Ben felt something shift within him. This wasn't just about helping Zoe. It was about recognizing that they were both broken, in their own ways, and yet here they were, still standing, still fighting. This moment, this raw, painful moment was a turning point. For Zoe, it was the first time she had allowed herself to feel something other than shame. For Ben, it was the first time he had seen Zoe truly begin to heal. As the night grew darker and the house settled into quiet, Ben realized that something had begun to change. The house, once cold and empty, now had the warmth of understanding. Zoe had shared her truth, and in doing so, she had given Ben a glimpse into her heart. And in that moment, he knew that neither of them was alone anymore. They didn't need saving, they just needed to be seen. And together they were finding their way back to the light, one step at a time.